Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Mike and Davina. I'm your host. And if you're a regular listener, you might have noticed that things have slowed down a little bit with the podcast lately. I've recently been moving. I just moved to a brand new apartment. And so I've just been busy with that, just packing everything and unpacking everything in the new house. And currently, as I'm sitting here in my new mix room, I've just got a bunch of boxes packed up behind me, and pretty much all I've got right now is my speakers and my microphone to do this podcast. If my mic sounds really roomy and reflective, it's just because I have absolutely no treatment at all in my room right now. But if you follow along on my mailing list, it's one of those things that I'm going to probably make a video for. I'm going to show you how to treat your room with acoustic treatment in order to get a lot more control of your room and make for a much more accurate listening environment and recording environment as well. So make sure to go to MasterYourMix.com and sign up for the mailing list, and then you'll get access to that video and all the other videos that I send out every week. Today I'm really excited because I've got a fantastic mastering engineer on the show. His name is Joao Carvalho. If you've never heard of him, at the time of this recording, he is currently a Grammy-nominated mastering engineer, and he has done tons of great work working with bands such as Smashing Pumpkins, Rush, Lights, Protest the Hero, Sloan, Silverstein, and a whole bunch more. He does fantastic work. I've worked with him a couple times on a few projects, and I can really vouch for his work. He's a great guy as well. I always love chatting with him. He's always a lot of fun. And I think you're going to learn a ton of really useful stuff from this conversation. So let's dive right into it. So Joe, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
So for people who might not be familiar with who you are, can you give me a little bit of background on your story and how you got into mastering?
Sure. It's been a while. I think first record that I mastered would have been in the mid-90s, probably 1996. It was a treble charger record. And but before that, I was making records. So I was producing and engineering recordings. I guess before that, I played in bands as well. So I kind of went up the ranks from playing music to being interested in getting interested in recording it, to then producing, and now mastering is pretty much all I do.
So what made you choose mastering then? Because most people kind of want to go that mixing or producing route, but then you decided to stick with mastering. So
Yeah.
What led you there?
Gosh, I think it's just maybe because I think I tried most things, I guess. You know, all bases were sort of covered, but it just seemed like it was the thing that that made the most sense to me. I'm pretty... I get inside of things. I'm, being a Virgo. So I like the minutia of it, the very subtle things. Not that you don't do that in mastering or sorry, in engineering or mixing or anything, but I think mastering gets even more subtle. So I think it's what I was best suited for.
Yeah.
Still,
and how did you learn to master? Did you intern, or was it just kind of trial and error?
Absolutely trial and error. The first, you don't want to hear the first record I mastered, which was the treble charger. I shouldn't be saying that, but they, when I heard it recently, it was like, oh my God, I wish I could
Treble Charger was a
this.
successful band, so you must have done something, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was all over the radio, and it played a lot, but I'd love to redo that record for sure.
I think that's pretty common. Everyone always looks back at their previous catalog and wishes they could redo a lot of that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
You started as a musician too, right? Aren't you a drummer?
Actually, I mean, I love to play drums, but guitar was my instrument when I was playing in bands. But I think I could sort of dabble in most things. I can pseudo play drums, pseudo play bass. Just a little bit of piano. So I think just when I got into production, just dabbling in all sorts of things and sort of having a vision or trying to play, figuring out how to play piano so it would work in a track. So Yeah, I think I dabble in most things, but guitar is the
Yeah.
main instrument. Long answer for, yeah, guitar is my instrument.
Well, I was going to ask, like, how do you think your ability to play instruments has helped the work you do? Like, does
Oh,
that have any impact in your mastering?
so good. Yeah, I think it's so good. And especially production, like from coming from a producer's point of view, like just as soon as when I hear something come through on the speakers that I'm about to master, and uh, you just excuse me, you hear the snare drum and instantly you go, oh, okay, I see where they're going with this. I know what sound it is that they were trying to achieve or are really close to or whatever. And so then that helps sort of shape how you're gonna, make decisions in the mastering. So for
Yeah,
sure, um, playing and producing was huge. Like
yeah,
it's instrumental for sure in mastering. It's
for
key.
sure.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your studio setup. What kind of gear are you using these days?
Um, my the room is so awesome. I love my mastering room. It was designed by Martin Pilchner, so it's truly one of the most accurate rooms out there. So it's you can feel really confident when you're making decisions and you're sitting in the chair and listening to the speakers. It really allows you to know that what you're hearing is really what's happening. And then so the room is super important. But then speakers that I've really grown to be comfortable with. I'm a super slow learner, so it took me forever to kind of get to learn this room and these speakers. But now it feels really confident. So the speakers are really key. I use Wilson Max twos, which are yeah, pretty stellar. Um, Set of speakers, very accurate, flat down to 20 hertz, which I think a lot of people try to say. I mean, I can never believe that anything's really truly flat down to 20 hertz, but they say they are. I also use a set of Studio Lab speakers, more the bookshelf type speakers, and a third set, which is just like a Bose iDock. I'm always kind of referencing on that, so kind of always switching back and forth between three sets of speakers. And then when it's doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing on those speakers, each one's a little bit different. Then it kind of graduates to the car test. So it's kind of funny. It's sort of my process. So but speakers to me are just the really the most important thing. Speakers in the room. Because you're basing your decisions on that stuff.
Hmm.
Gear, I love my GML EQ still. The 9500, just a really excellent, it's a little more on the clinical side, I guess. It's not super vibey EQ, but it's kind of does the thing you want it to do when you need it. Um, um, I have a Weiss 7-band EQ as well, a Weiss de-esser, the DS1, a Mark III, which is still the coolest de-esser I think ever. I have a bunch of stuff, but I mean the stuff that's usually in my rack, that is we alternate every once in a while, but the Shadow Hills compressor, their mastering compressor, the the Airfield Eliminator, which is truly a bit of a secret weapon, I guess, for mastering. I've found, and
What
converters
is
are.
it about that piece of gear?
Um, well, long story or short story.
Well, you said it's a secret weapon,
Yeah.
so now you've revealed the secret.
Well, when Dave was initially Dave Miller, the owner of Airfield, when he was designing it, he brought it here, and so we kind of it went through a couple of different incarnations in the beginning, but we were able to sort of fine tune it, and I kept putting it into. I would take my send the signal into my Manley Varimu at the time, and just kind of get it set up. Would sound awesome. You get it to this point where okay, it's doing this really nice thing in compression. It's just beginning to saturate. It's just doing the things that it's supposed to be doing, and then you take the output. You try to give it as much output out, and so I kind of set it up that way. Then I would take those cables and just jam it into the little box that he brought in, and try to set up the same thing. And then the first time he brought it in, it was like, okay, it's cool, but it kind of needs a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Then second time he brought in the box a couple of weeks later, same thing. I ran it into a Very just trying to get it set up, making it all sound as cool as possible. Took those same cables, put it into his box, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, wow, this is really great, really nice compression. It's doing this really nice, slow, soft thing that works really nice in mastering. But then the output was great, but I felt like I could still get a little more out of the Very. So I think that the thing then was like, wow, anything you can do about just clean output would be awesome. So next time he brought it back, same thing. Put it in the Very, got it all set up, sounded awesome, doing this thing. It's like, okay, great. Wow, this is really good. Take those same cables, put it into his box, and it was like, okay, this is awesome. Compression's awesome. And then just went to the output, and it's just dead clean. And I was able to get, and still can, like 2 to 3 dB more really clean, clear output without things getting saturated than any other piece of a compressor or gear that I've tried. So using it as the last thing in the chain, it's just super clear, super clean, just tons of headroom, and it's just an awesome box too. It just compresses beautifully, and this is the mastering version I have as well too. So it's detented, and the transformers on it are just awesome too. Very subtle change. There's Souter transformers and Jensen transformers, and so you can switch back and forth between a slightly more North American sound or a British sound kind of thing.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a super cool unit. I love it to death. It's amazing.
That's quite the advertisement for that.
Yeah.
You should be a sales guy for them. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's
I want
super. Yeah, and it's so reasonably priced. Like what you get in that box is crazy. So it's definitely I'd say best bang for the buck as far as compression. So
well, a lot of high end gear. It sounds like then all around at the studio.
Yeah, I mean these are just we have I'm not in the rack. There's lots of other stuff too. Massive passives and we also have a studio across the street called Revolution Recording and it's so there's tons of stuff over there that sometimes
I wanted to ask you about that as well because Revolution is just an insane studio. Is it the largest studio in Canada?
I believe it is. I think it has the largest recording floor, and it's a 3-room facility. So it's a big space. I'm not really sure if there's bigger ones out there, but it's definitely one of them.
But it definitely has like the dream list of every engineer's like wish list of gear, and I was curious like in like these days it seems like bigger studios are closing and smaller home studios are becoming more and more prevalent. What was the intention behind creating such a massive studio with all of that amazing gear?
Because we're really dumb. No, it was just a bit of a passion. Just loving to kind of excel in audio, just trying to do and keep the whole thing going. Just keep the real way of recording going. Joe Dunphy, one of my partners at Revolution, he's there's a podcast for you if you want to get into tech. Joe's a genius, and he truly can just dream something up in his head overnight and then go into our shop because we have all the presses and punches and we can build everything in there. We can build the boxes, wire everything up, and he can just design a preamp in his head and then build it, and it sounds unreal. Like
That's amazing.
Truly, some of the stuff he's done is just insane. He's an engineer's engineer kind of thing. So yeah, it's a pretty special place for sure.
So do you think that there's still a need for analog gear in recording and mastering when everything else seems to be going digital?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a time and place, and I'd say more so in recording for sure. I mean, when you run stuff through that Neve console and through all those crazy microphones, all the Sonys and Neumanns and all these crazy vintage microphones. It's a huge microphone collection we have over there. And yeah, there's a tone that just happens, just it's just a little more three-dimensional. It just you can't deny that it sounds great, for tracking especially. But yeah, in mixing and in mastering, there becomes, you kind of just pick your battles. You just kind of, I'm always, I've always got the both chains happening. So I've always got, digital running and analog, and with a flip of a switch, I can sort of hear, one or the other instantly, and then that's how I make my choice. There, I just kind of go, okay, this is clearly sounding better in analog. Okay, it's got to go that way, or wow, it's already at its maximum. Like any more saturation, any more anything is just going to mess it up. I should keep away from analog. So it's you just got to you just pick whatever needs to happen for different projects. But I'd say
For sure.
probably these days I'd be a little more on the majority of being on the digital side of things, or a combination of things. More often it's just analog and digital.
That's cool. So I guess before we go into some questions about the mastering process, one thing that I wanted to ask was, I know that there's a lot of people who seem to think that if they understand how to use EQs and compressors and limiters and that kind of stuff, that they essentially understand how to use a lot of the same equipment as a mastering engineer. So if they can get their mixes to a point where they're really happy with them, what's the argument for taking it that next step and getting a professional mastering engineer to work on their project?
Mm. It's so much about the subtleties. Like it's when you're mixing, I find, and I always try to encourage, just like, man, when you're mixing, make it big. Like, just overshoot just a little bit. It's when something comes in and it's already sounding like it's mastered, which I think is definitely the exception. It's pretty rare that would happen. But yeah, like when you're mixing, you just, like, you're trying to make this big picture, and so it feels like it's better to just have a little more bottom end, and just, something just feeling like a little larger than life, so that then you can sort of just tailor back just ever so slightly, remove any of the bulbousness out of it, just kind of the things that are just a little murky or whatever, and then all of a sudden, whoa, it just comes to life. But not it doesn't always, like, not everything has to be mastered. There's some guys that I work with, and super, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to name. I don't want to name names if I'm not supposed to name names, or whatever.
Go for it.
But
Go for it.
but yeah, like something like, often Tim Abraham is an amazing example of, like, stuff just sounds phenomenal. Like often it's like, do I need to touch this? Do I need to do anything to this? So there's definitely exceptions, but I find when guys just go a little bit bigger with it. It just feels great, because then it just leaves a little bit of room to sort of open things up. So yeah, I think mastering is important for sure. I think to most people, I think there's really a need for it, but
Yeah, you had mentioned that there are some cases where mastering isn't necessary. So, like, what kind of situations create those?
oh, well, again, when stuff just sounds correct. I mean, it's really unusual when that happens. But when stuff just comes in and it's just like, okay, this is just done, and it's already at full volume. And also, I mean, there are some guys. I mean, I think guys like I think Daniel Lanois is definitely one of those guys that he just likes to create his thing, and it's done. And if somebody is going for that kind of vision, like, every engineer is a little bit different, but I think most engineers kind of are expecting that there's going to be another guy that's just gonna tie it all in together. And But there are guys, I think, like Lanois, that he just, this is my mix, and that's the way I want it to be. It's done.
Hmm.
But even then, still, sometimes when you're putting a record together, sure, you can have this mix and it sounds awesome, and then you can do another mix of another song and it sounds incredible. But do they sit well on the record together? And that's the thing where sometimes the mastering engineer can sort of remove a little bit of something or add something to some one of the other tracks to sort of make them feel like they're more cohesive through the whole listening process of listening to the whole record. And that's pretty key in mastering, obviously.
And do you find that a lot of people view mastering as this thing that's going to drastically change their sound? Like, are people coming in expecting you to like essentially like remix it almost, or most people coming in just saying, "I love the sound of this, just give it that extra 10%."
All of the above. It's just like
Yeah.
it's you just I get all sorts. There's some situations where it's like, wow, this is pristine. Like, just, man, what do you do? Just leave it alone. It sounds better if you just leave it alone, or just that tiny last little bit of something. But then there's other records where, yeah, it's like you're saying, it's like mixing and the mastering kind of thing. Sometimes, breaking it out and asking them to break it out into stems, because I feel like I'll be able to just control things way better with stems. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you really are kind of reshaping this thing. It sounds like it's a bit of a remix. Um,
Hmm.
but having to be super, super careful with that stuff, because you don't want to, you're not trying to step on somebody's toes. And, when I do go there with the stems, I'm trying to be really careful of not not messing up somebody's vision, but so you have to feel out the artist, you have to feel out the engineer. It's like, okay, what do you want? Do you want to go there, or do you want to sort of keep this thing that you guys had going, and just try to benefit it as much as possible just through standard um, stereo mastering. Um, yeah, it's tricky. It's all of the above. Like, it's all of them. You know?
Yeah. So then, what's your mindset for going into a new project? Where do you start? What kind of things are you listening for?
Well, first thing, when I go for a full record, like if there's a full record that I'm going to master that day, I scan through all the songs. I like to listen to a verse and a chorus of each song, and then at that point, you I just make the decision. So if there's 10 songs, it might be track 5 that just sounds the best. Just kind of listening to all of them, and you go, okay, that one I think is the one that's just going to sonically be the best sounding track on the record. So I start with that one, try to get it into its best spot, and then once I have that one done, then I can go back to the beginning, start the record, and try to and use that 5th track as the benchmark to try to bring all the other ones into that world.
Yeah. And in your opinion, what makes a great master? Like, how do you know when you're done your mastering?
Oh God. I never stop. I mean, and truthfully, usually even after doing that 5th track, that I'm thinking, okay, this is done. Through the course of the day, I'm probably still going to tweak that a little bit, or I might, or maybe not. But generally, when the other one starts shaping up, and then other things come to light that are sounding really cool, then you might want to add a little bit of that to that first track that you did. And so it's just always kind of manipulating it. It's always changing. And then the next day, I like to listen, like to have a car listen and fresh ears listen, and then even then it still tweaks a little bit more after that. And so it just keeps evolving until
Yeah.
somebody signs off on it. So that's
Well, I was gonna say, how long does it normally take you to master a song?
um, I think once after everything's said and done, once like the initial mastering, listening to it again, tweaking, doing all that kind of stuff, I'd say it probably averages about an hour per song. So if it is a 10 song record, it probably will end up spending 10 hours messing with it on some level, whether that's just the mastering, or if that's tweaking it, or yeah, I'd say on average probably an hour.
And is it more of like a templated approach where, like you had mentioned, you find the song that sounds best? So after you've matched up like the first song to that, is that kind of setting the tone for the rest of it?
It sort of does, because I mean, I'm kind of, when scanning through all the songs, uh, like say again the 10 songs, you do get a sense of the whole record at that point, and you're kind of going, yeah, this one here is going to be the one that just kind of is going to set the tone for the whole thing. And often when clients attend the session, it's probably one of the first things I ask is just like, okay, what's your favorite sounding song? Not your favorite track, but what's your favorite sounding song? And then it's usually pretty unanimous. They get it. They're thinking the same thing as I'm thinking when I go through and listen to them afterwards as well. So it's pretty obvious when a track just stands out as being the best sounding one,
Hmm.
and then you use that
And
one.
and do you find that that's because just like the mix dictated that it was the best sounding song, or is it just usually the song, or like how do you gauge that?
I think it would be more so the mix. I mean, sometimes it is arrangement in song too, because it just lends it. Like when you get a great song and it's super catchy, it just lends itself to everything. The magic, all of it comes together. But I'm thinking purely from Sonics. Like the bottoms sounding like it's going to be its biggest, and everything just feels the most correct across the whole
Hmm.
mix, kind of thing.
And what's a typical mastering chain consist of for you?
I'm always EQ first. I shouldn't say always, but I'd say the vast majority of the time it's usually EQ first. So I find when you flatten out the EQ curve, when you get the EQ to where roughly where it's supposed to be, then everything else like just falls into place. So compression falls into place. All of a sudden, the compressor isn't hitting hard because there's too much bottom end, or or there's a weird bump somewhere in the mids that's kind of not making the compressor react more than it should. And even at that point, you can bring stuff in much hotter when your EQ curve is flat. Soon when your EQ is all messed up, then you just can't get things loud. It freaks things out. It distorts things. So EQ is the vast majority of the times is going to be the first thing, and then
Yep.
then it might be dynamic EQ sort of after the general EQ. Maybe a little bit of dynamic EQ comes after second in line. Any kind of dynamics after that. Yeah, I think that would be
So
generally.
do you normally have like you said you usually have about two different EQs in the chain?
Yeah, I try to do as little as possible. To be honest, if I could just do nothing to a mix, and it's not because I'm trying to be lazy. It's just
No,
that's what
no.
I'm shooting for. I used to have all sorts of stuff going on. Like I used to have multiple EQs and dynamic stuff happening all over the place, and 5 plugins going on and stuff like that. And now, man, it just makes me really happy when it's just like a couple of things happening. It just and and I think that makes me happy just because generally when somebody comes back to me and says like, man, it sounds so great, like what went on, and then it's just like, wow, very little, like very very little went on, and that's usually the case. Like the less I do, the more um pristine it seems to get somehow. So it just makes sense. Less phase distortion, less everything. It just less is more for sure.
Hmm. And I often hear a lot of people talk about EQ with mastering, and they'll say that mastering involves fewer broad stroke EQ moves, like boosting cuts. And then there's like the other side of the spectrum, which people say that it involves more surgical cuts. Like, what's your approach to that?
All of the above. It just again, a different artist producer. Sometimes it'll be really surgical. Sometimes it'll be just broad strokes. Sometimes it's both. It's just whatever it needs. Can't just say it's one thing. You need to
Yeah.
sort of be able to do all of those things.
Yeah. From a confidence standpoint with mastering, at what point did you feel like you started to really make good masters? Was there like a defining moment in your career where you're like, yeah, nailed it. Like, I got this.
Gosh, I mean, seriously, I think a couple of years ago. It's kind of crazy. I've been doing it for so long, but I swear it just feels like it's feeling like, and I think it's just the reaction of people. Like you kind of know when people are kind of telling you things, like wow, we've been working on together for a long time, but something's happened recently, or so. Yeah, it feels like as of the last few years for sure, it's definitely feeling better. But thank God, I mean, because that hopefully you're always learning. That's the thing, So um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say recent.
And you've been doing it for quite a while, so it makes sense that,
Yeah,
like, kind of what going back to what we were originally talking about, like listening back to your old catalog,
yeah,
how you wish you could redo some of that stuff, right?
yeah.
I think if you do that, you'll always think it just was recent that you got good.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Been doing a lot of remastering too. Not for that reason, but it's
Yeah.
pretty cool to sort of do it after the fact. And records that I did do way back when, like in '96 or whatever, recently remastered Hayden's first record that I recorded and co-produced with him, and also initially mastered. And so it was pretty cool to redo that and go, oh wow, crazy, crazy what we were
Yeah.
doing, you know. But that whole record was so cool and completely unusual. But yes, remastering stuff is really cool. I've been doing a fair bit of it recently.
Cool. Are there any weird techniques that you like to apply when you're mastering that other people might think you're a little crazy for doing?
I can't name those things, can I? I'm just giving away all the secrets. Um, true. I don't know. Truthfully, not. I don't think I'm doing anything that other guys aren't really doing. I swear, it's all about the EQ curve. It's all about the
Yeah.
EQ curve. As soon as you get the EQ curve correct or really close, everything else falls into place. You can make it loud. You can make it not feel like compressors are pumping. You know, it just you get that EQ curve right, and so I don't think there's any crazy, you know, little trick that I'm doing. I don't think so.
Yeah. So it's just like more of a feel thing. You're just shooting for what feels best to your ears.
hmm I've been listening to the same reference tracks that I've been listening to ever since I thought, you know, like I got in this room and I got these speakers. And I mean, I listen to modern stuff too because you know clearly things evolve, but there's still an EQ curve that I think I've kind of latched onto that, and I finally figured out maybe how to, you know, it just resets things. It resets my ears. That's sort of what it is. So yeah, it's just a way. It's a flatness curve. I think I shoot for, and yeah. So I think it's EQ. It generally is just EQ.
Yeah. And what are the biggest problems that you see with the projects you master? Do they have more to do with how people are preparing their tracks, or like just like is it stuff in the mix? Like what issues do you see?
Um, yeah, I think I love it. I mean, truthfully, I love what guys are sending. Like um it seems like there's a whole new fresh take on things, you know. But as far as what might be considered a mistake, I mean, I think a lot of times um, a little too much compression, maybe. You know, it's probably going to be all that standard stuff that you hear mastering engineers say, but I think it really is like people tend to sort of make everything sit too tightly together, and it just doesn't make for transient for an open sounding mix. Um, good. Well, yeah, I was just stuff I was just working on the last couple of days. Was great because it came super wide open. Like they, you know, uh, Jeff Martin from the Tea Party. It's a record that he produced, and he sent over a mixed, or sorry, a limited version and an unlimited version of the track. And so he just sort of got it to a point where he wanted it to be, just to show me it. But it when the limiter was off, it just was wide open, and the snare and kick were just really coming through. And then so I was just able to sort of then see what his limited version was, and I was able to get it there, but still managing to keep it a little more open sounding, you know. So it's really cool to just keep stuff just not hyper compressed or limited sounding.
And do you find more problems that occurred in the recording stage versus mixing stage, or the other way around?
I would say it would be a little more on the mix stage, but yeah, I think the majority would probably be in the mix stage. Yeah, but sometimes it is going to be the tracking, but usually a lot of those things could be fixed in the mix. So yeah, it's probably
Mhm.
most problems would be mix based.
Yeah. And what sort of things do you recommend people do in order to best prepare their tracks for mastering? Do you have any specific submission requirements?
I'm always just telling him to, if it's feeling right to you, just get it to sound correct to you. If you're gonna be working on a mix and you've got a limiter or some sort of multiband happening on your master bus, and then you're thinking, oh no, I'm gonna take all that off so that the mastering engineer can deal with that, and the whole mix just comes unglued, then that's really bad to do too, because then where should I go with that? You know what I mean? So I think just as long as you're not really overcooking it, like if you're just not over compressing, you're not over limiting on your master, even volume is fine. Like I can deal with, if I need to turn something down, I can to sort of then bring it back up. So it's the volume thing isn't a problem. I think it's just the compression and limiting. Obviously, you want to get your EQ as correct as possible too, but I think the bigger thing is just stuff coming in a little overcooked kind of thing.
Hmm. One topic that's been probably beaten to death, and you're probably sick of talking about it as a mastering engineer, is the loudness wars. Like, do you feel that the loudness wars are still an issue? Uh, and what's your take on what trumps more, like loudness or clarity? What's your view on that?
Oh gosh, for certain, clarity is far better for sonics. I mean, I would love to hear everything. Ideally, I'd love to hear everything down 2 dB from where we're roughly at right now, where the kind of the general level of mastering is, because that last two dB is sort of where I think that those nice transients and things are sort of really getting lost. But but you know what? I That being said, I think we're doing pretty okay on the loudness front. Like I feel like we can get records pretty loud. Um, the uh, I I don't really, truthfully, um, I'm not too worried about the loudness thing. I'm kind of hoping it all comes down. I mean, especially with the new streaming sites like Spotify, it, I think it might just take a little bit of time where they're beginning to educate, I guess the music making public or world on how what they're basically doing, and they're turning down the really loud sounding tracks that are coming to them, and they're boosting up the low level tracks that are coming to them. So in the end, it really doesn't make a volume difference. Like you're not going to be louder on Spotify than this other record that was mastered much more dynamically.
Hmm.
um, there's so I don't know. I think and I hope that there's a like kind of a slightly better time for loudness coming in the near
Yeah.
future.
And with all of the major streaming services constantly changing their compression algorithms, how has that affected your process? Do you find yourself having to make multiple revisions of masters in order to optimize the sound for each, or are you just shooting for a standard level that you've found seems to work best for all of them?
I'm still going for a pretty standard level. So I'm trying to shoot for that competitive volume that people are looking for. But that being said, I mean, there's certain um, like iTunes is when you have a master for iTunes master that we create, those we do sort of knock down in volume ever so slightly. There's a slightly different process, and we're also submitting high resolution um, versions of the songs that way too. So, but ultimately, and also for vinyl masters, we do a slightly different process where I do remove a little bit of the final stage of limiting to just open things up a little bit, because on vinyl it's not about loudness at all, so there's no issue there. You can give them a really reasonably loud recording, or something that isn't as cranked as a CD master, and let it be a little more open in the transients, not do any type of brick wall limiting. And so we prep our vinyl masters that way. So I do back up one of the steps and create a separate master for vinyl, and the master for the iTunes is slightly different. We're just beginning to toy with possibly doing it also for Spotify and some of the other streaming services that are just automatically um, doing their own level matching. So yeah, things are changing a little bit for sure.
Hmm.
The way we're presenting masters.
Yeah. And do you find it hard to keep up with all of the changes that are happening? Because it seems like they're just
Yeah,
throwing these changes at their service without even notifying people.
yeah, and I think that's why we've been a little cautious up until now. It's like, okay, I'm still prepping my master because no matter what, I'm trying to create the the best sounding master that I can create, and then from that point on, we either back up a step for the vinyl master, or and now we're beginning to think about the about supplying lower volumes for the streaming services. So yeah, it's definitely changing, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, there's a lot of people that are listening to this that are relatively new in their careers. What kind of advice would you have for someone who's just getting started with mastering and wants to pursue that as a career?
Mm. Um, well, I mean, go for it. It's awesome. It's the coolest job on the planet for sure. But I can't say enough about how important it is to sort of be a musician or have some musical kind of know-how, and engineer and get into production. I mean, all of those other things help so much in becoming a mastering engineer. I'd say that would be the most beneficial thing, is to do it all. Don't just I wouldn't just go straight into mastering. I think you're going to bypass a lot of stuff that would be really important to helping you become a mastering engineer.
Hmm. And do you think it's important for people to go to school for this kind of stuff, or it's just better to take the intern route and work in a studio and shadow people?
That's a tough one. Yeah, because it's expensive to go to these schools. You certainly do learn a lot of cool stuff. I mean, there's great schools. You do learn, the some of the the tech behind what's going on. Whereas if you just get thrown into, if you go intern, you might just be kind of thrown into the situations, and you're not really kind of understanding what's happening technically, or the electrical side of things. So I don't know. I think if I had to do it, I'd go into just trying to get into a studio first, and see where that would take me. And then if it's not going the place where I'd like it to go, then maybe I might go to school after the fact.
Yeah. And what about for those new people trying to get new clients? Like if you had to start all over today and open up your mastering shop today, what would be your approach to getting some new clients?
Well, I mean, it's just again all the things that are that are at our disposal, like just the the World Wide Web. You've got to get yourself out there on. You can use that to your advantage on social media. But how do you rise above the rest? Like what makes you different from it? Because everybody else is doing the same thing. So,
Hmm.
I mean, old school, and it would always work for me, would be to just go to a club and watch a bunch of bands and talk to the bands, and you're bound to listen to somebody that night that's like, wow, this band's pretty cool, and you just go talk to them, say, man, I just want to work with you. I'll do this for next to nothing, or even I'll just do a song for free or whatever, and then I think that can go a long way.
Hmm. Yep. Cool. Well, I know you got some clients coming in, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. So we should probably start to wrap up. But how can people follow you online? What's the best way to learn more about you and your studio?
Well, we have a a website, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm so not the online guy. Like I'm always just working. So I don't really.
That's definitely a trend I find with everybody who I interview who's super busy. Is they're like, yeah, I don't have time for social media.
Yeah, yeah. It's just I truthfully just don't really do it. I occasionally, if somebody asks me to be a friend or something, okay, I'll friend you. But I'm yeah, I'm the world's worst social media guy, I think. But you can certainly, I mean, I have an email address, and people can certainly reach out. I'm always happy to kind of listen to something that somebody's working on, and just give them an opinion. And so it that would be a good way to do it. You know, if somebody's just curious, I'm happy to talk.
Awesome. And any cool projects that you're currently working on that you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're always super, super cool. I mean, I like the, I'm always loving the newer, younger, independent bands that I'm working with. I mean, that's usually the exciting stuff. But yeah, I just finished working on the new Sheepdogs record, which is super, super cool. Been doing a lot of remastering lately, which is loving doing. Just did the whole Max Webster box set.
Very cool.
New Sloan record is crazy cool, so good. I love that band so much. Yeah, gonna be remastering the new Sloan box set for the Navy Blues. So yeah, just I'm the luckiest guy on the planet. I get to work with these bands that I'm a fan of. So it's pretty neat. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here and letting us take up some of your time. I really appreciate it. I think you shared a lot of really cool tips. So thanks again.
Thanks, Mike.
So that's my interview with Joao Carvalho. I love talking with that guy. He's always such an awesome dude to talk to and really nice guy all around. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, he's currently up for a nomination for the Grammy Awards, which are happening this weekend. It's for his work on the Rose Cousins album. It sounds amazing. So guys, definitely check out that record. It sounds super big, super polished. And that's just what Joao does. That's what he does when he masters. He makes everything sound amazing. So once again, Joao, thank you so much for being on the show and best of luck with that. I also want to give a quick shout out to Brian Lowe. Brian is Joa's studio manager. He's actually my guitar player in my band, and he's an awesome dude as well, and a great mastering engineer in his own right. And Brian helped us get all set up today, so quick shout out to Brian. Brian, you rule. Thank you so much. So that's pretty much it for today's episode. If this is your first time listening to the Master Your Mix podcast, please make sure to check out the website. It's MasterYourMix.com. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, leave a rating and review. That helps us get exposed to a lot more people online. And if you're looking to take your mixes to the next level, make sure to download your free copy of the Ultimate Mixing Blueprint, which I'm currently offering on MasterYourMix.com. All you got to do is visit the website. At the top of the page, there's a link to download your free copy, and it's a guide that shows you how to use EQ and compression in your mixes so that you can get clarity in your mixes much, much faster. And once you sign up to download that, you'll be added to my mailing list, and every week on there, I send out new videos, tutorials, tips and tricks, blog articles, and a whole bunch of other great resources designed to help you make better mixes. So make sure to check that out, and I'll talk to you in the next episode, guys. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit MasterYourMix.com.